The baby had been screaming for 47 minutes when the black waitress did the unthinkable. She dropped her serving tray, marched past 6 armed men, snatched the crying infant from the tattoo-covered Mafia boss, and breastfed him in the middle of the crowded restaurant. Every conversation stopped. Several guards reached beneath their jackets, but the Mafia boss lifted one hand, warning them not to move. Because the moment the baby touched the waitress, he became completely silent. He gripped her blouse, closed his tearful eyes, and rested against her chest as though he had finally found the person he had been searching for. The waitress tried to hide her trembling hands. Kong Jihuan noticed. Before we uncover why Kiera Hayes' hands were trembling, tell me this. Could you forgive a mother who gave up her child because poverty left her no other choice? Type your answer in the comments before you keep watching, and subscribe if stories like this one keep you up past midnight. Because the waitress was hiding a secret, but the Mafia boss was hiding one that could destroy them all. Seoul's Child Women's Hospital sat 3 blocks from the Han River, and on a cold March morning, Kiera Hayes left it through the side entrance so the nurses at the front desk wouldn't see her crying again. She was 26 years old, 6 days postpartum, and she owned exactly 140,000 won, which was less than 110 American dollars. She wore a gray hoodie 2 sizes too large, black leggings gone thin at the knee, and sneakers that let in water whenever it rained. Her son slept against her chest in a second-hand carrier, wrapped in the last blanket she owned. She thought, I have carried you for 9 months, and I don't have a room to carry you into. Her stomach knew the truth before her mind accepted it. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead and felt him stir. He smelled like milk and hospital soap, and she memorized it the way a person memorizes a phone number they know they'll never dial again. A hospital social worker named Kwan Era had already found her twice that week. Kwan Era had a soft voice and a clipboard she never stopped tapping. You cannot sleep outside with an infant in this weather, Kwan Era said, catching up to her near the bus stop. I know a place. A good place. St. Agnes House takes in newborns whose mothers cannot provide immediate housing. It is not permanent. It is only until you're stable. I don't have anyone, Kiera said. Not here. Not in Seoul. Not anywhere. Then let someone help you, Kwan Era said, and her voice was so gentle that Kiera almost didn't notice how quickly the woman produced the paperwork, already filled out, already needing only a signature. Kiera didn't know yet that Kwan Era had been paid 2 million won 3 days earlier by a man she had never met. She only knew that her son's lips had started trembling from the cold, and that trembling decided everything. She signed at St. Agnes House the following afternoon. She wrote a letter she folded into quarters. She placed her son's father's silver pendant into the small bag beside the blanket. She kissed her baby's forehead 11 times, because some part of her believed that if she kissed him enough times, one of those kisses would stay with him even after she walked out the door. She said, I am not leaving you. I am making sure you get to stay. Kwan Era stood near the door, clipboard against her chest, and said nothing while Kiera signed the final page. When it was done, she offered one small, practiced smile. You've done the responsible thing. Most young mothers in your position don't have the strength to. It doesn't feel like strength, Kiera said. It rarely does, Kwan Era said, and left the room quickly enough that Kiera didn't have time to ask why a social worker's shoes cost more than 3 months of her own rent. The small, gray-haired nun at the front desk did not touch the baby until Kiera had already turned around. She had done this enough times to know that watching a mother watch her own hands let go was the cruelest thing anyone could be asked to witness twice, and she spared herself and Kiera both. Kiera found work 4 days later. The restaurant was called Cheongdam Table, an elegant dining room in Gangnam that served lawmakers, chaebol heirs, television actors, and men whose business cards listed import-export companies that imported very little and exported even less. The manager, a tired man named On Woo Bin, interviewed her standing up, glancing at his watch every few seconds. Can you carry 4 plates at once without dropping anything? He asked. Yes. Can you smile at men who don't deserve it and keep smiling after they leave a bad tip? I've had practice, Kiera said. Can you start tonight? I can start right now, if you let me. He hired her on the spot, partly because she spoke fluent Korean and fluent English without hesitation, and partly because the previous waitress had quit 2 days earlier after a customer threw a wine glass at the wall over a delayed order. Her uniform was a fitted white blouse, black trousers, a black waist apron, and flat black shoes that let her stand for 10 hours at a stretch. The blouse was tight enough across the chest that she had learned, within her first week, exactly how to press her forearm against her ribs whenever her body reminded her that she had given birth 6 days before she started the job. Every night after her shift ended, she walked 11 minutes to St. Agnes' house and stood across the street. She never went in. She told herself it was because Kwan Era had warned her that repeated visits could jeopardize the adoption placement. But the real reason was simpler and worse. She was afraid that if she walked through that door, she would never walk back out without him. She stood outside on the 7th night when 3 black SUVs turned onto the narrow street and stopped in front of the gate. Kiera's whole body went still. A man stepped out of the middle vehicle wearing a tailored black suit over an open-collared charcoal shirt. Dark ink climbed the side of his neck and disappeared beneath his collar. 4 guards surrounded him without being asked, the way men move when the arrangement has been rehearsed 1,000 times and no longer requires instruction. She didn't know his name yet. She only knew, the way a mother knows, that whatever business had brought armed men to an orphanage gate at 9 at night was about to touch her son. She watched him walk inside. She watched the lights shift in the windows on the 2nd floor. 22 minutes later, he walked back out carrying an infant carrier against his chest, and even from across the street, in the dark, under a street lamp that flickered every 4 seconds, Kiera recognized the blanket. She ran. She didn't decide to run. Her legs simply moved, and by the time her mind caught up, she was already in the street with her hand raised, shouting a word she didn't remember choosing. The convoy pulled away before she reached the curb. She stood in the middle of the road with her chest heaving, and a delivery driver on a scooter swerved around her and cursed over his shoulder. She didn't hear him. She was staring at the taillights, memorizing the plate number the way she had once memorized the smell of her son's hair, like her life depended on getting it exactly right. She wrote the plate number on her palm in eyeliner because she didn't have paper. It took her 5 days and a favor from a cousin of On Woo Bin's who worked at a registration office to learn that the plate belonged to a private security fleet registered under Kong Holdings, and that Kong Holdings was one name among several used by a man named Kong Ji-hwan, 29 years old, heir to an empire that owned 4 luxury hotels, a shipping line, 2 nightclubs, and, according to whispers nobody printed in newspapers, several businesses that never appeared on any balance sheet at all. The gossip columns loved one detail more than any other. Kong Ji-hwan, they said, had been left permanently unable to father children after an old injury, a fact that had turned his own family into a nest of circling relatives, each one hoping the empire would eventually fall into their hands instead of his. Kiera read that sentence 4 times in a coffee shop with a laptop she'd borrowed from On Woo Bin's cousin, and she thought, then why did you just walk out of an orphanage with my son? 3 days after that, Kong Ji-hwan walked into Cheongdam table carrying the same baby, and the whole dining room turned to look. He had not come alone. 2 guards trailed behind him carrying an amount of baby equipment that looked absurd next to men built like doormen. A diaper bag, 3 bottles, a folded stroller, and an electronic rocker the size of a suitcase. The baby had clearly been crying for some time already. His face was red, his fists were clenched, and his small body arched backward every time Kong Ji-hwan tried to settle him against his shoulder. He won't take the bottle, said the guard nearest him, a broad-shouldered man named Han Woo-sung, in a tone that suggested he had said this sentence several times already that day. I can see that, Kang Ji-hwan said. He held the baby the way a man holds a package he's afraid of dropping and equally afraid of being seen holding. His shoulders were rigid. His jaw was tight. Every table near him had gone quiet, watching one of the most feared men in the city fail, in real time, to soothe an infant. Then Kiera heard the crying from across the room. Something happened in her body before her thoughts arrived. Her arms ached. Her chest tightened, and then, mortifyingly, began to leak through the front of her blouse. Her heart slammed once, hard, like a door closing. That's him. That's my son. She didn't remember putting the tray down. She remembered crossing the floor, remembered Han Woo-sung's hand twitching toward his jacket, remembered Kang Ji-hwan's dark eyes locking onto her face with an expression she couldn't read, shock, maybe, or something that hadn't decided yet whether to become anger. Give him to me, she said. Excuse me, Kang Ji-hwan said. Give him to me. Now. She didn't wait for permission. She lifted the baby directly out of his arms, and the whole restaurant seemed to inhale at once. Guard straightened. Somewhere behind her, a wine glass clinked against a plate and stopped. She carried her son to the corner booth, sat down, pulled a clean cloth from her apron, and covered herself. She unbuttoned 2 buttons of her blouse beneath the cloth, and within seconds, the baby was nursing. He went silent immediately. His small fist closed around her finger. His whole body loosened, the way a held breath finally lets go, and he drank like he hadn't eaten in a week. Though of course he had eaten. He simply hadn't eaten from the only source his body had spent 9 months learning. Kang Ji-hwan stood over the booth without moving. How? He said, and stopped, because he didn't seem to know how to finish the sentence. How did you do that? Motherly instinct, Kiera said, not looking up. I've handled babies before. It wasn't a lie exactly. It also wasn't the truth, and she heard the gap between the two the moment the words left her mouth. Kang Ji-hwan studied her face for a long moment, the kind of look a man gives when he's filing something away for later rather than accepting it now. He has rejected 4 nannies, he said quietly. 2 nurses. A pediatric specialist from Severance Hospital. He screamed through all of them. Babies know things adults have forgotten how to notice, Kiera said. Apparently, Kang Ji-hwan said, and sat down across from her without being invited, close enough that she could smell cedar and gun oil and, faintly, spit up milk on his collar. What is your name? Kiera. Kiera, he repeated, like he was testing whether the name matched something in his memory and coming up empty. You said you've handled babies before. Whose? She felt her pulse jump in her throat. Just babies, she said. In another life. He didn't push further, not that night. But when the baby finally slept, curled against her chest with one fist still loosely holding her finger, Kang Ji-hwan looked at the two of them with an expression Kiera would spend the next several weeks trying to name, suspicion, wrapped around something dangerously close to hope. By the time Kang Ji-hwan finally left the restaurant that night, Ha-jun asleep and heavy against his shoulder, the entire staff of Cheongdam Table had gathered near the kitchen pass, pretending to polish glasses they had already polished twice. You just took a baby out of the Mafia boss's arms, On Woo-bin said, staring at Kiera like she'd grown a second head. In front of his guards. In front of half the National Assembly's Finance Committee, who were sitting at table 6. He needed help, Kiera said, tying her apron back on with hands that hadn't fully stopped shaking. People do not simply walk up to Kang Ji-hwan and take things out of his hands, Song Doo-jin said. People who do that disappear. He didn't look like he wanted to make me disappear, Kiera said. He looked like a man who'd just watched a magic trick he couldn't explain, On Woo-bin said. I've worked this floor 12 years. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you tonight. Kiera said nothing to that. She picked her tray back up off the booth table where she'd abandoned it, straightened the napkins that had scattered when she dropped it, and went back to work, because work was the only part of the night that still made sense to her. Why does he know you? He said, more to himself than to her. and neither of them answered it for a long time, long after the baby had drifted off between them. Kang Ji-hwan came back the next evening, and the evening after that, and by the end of the second week, the entire staff of Cheongdam Table understood that his business meetings had somehow rearranged themselves around Kiera's shift schedule. "He books the same booth every time," said a fellow server named Song Do-jin, refilling water glasses, his eyes bright and eager to gossip. "He used to eat upstairs in the private dining room. Now he sits in your section like a regular customer. Do you know who that is?" "I know," Kiera said. "Then you know he doesn't sit anywhere unless he's decided to," Song Do-jin said, and walked off before she could answer. The baby, whom Kang Ji-hwan had named Ha-jun after the orphanage completed the temporary paperwork, cried the instant Kang Ji-hwan walked in the door most evenings, and quieted the instant Kiera took him. She taught Kang Ji-hwan how to support the baby's neck without gripping him like a briefcase. She taught him how to tell a hunger cry from a tired cry from the specific outraged shriek that meant his diaper had been on backward for the last hour, which had happened twice. "You're holding him like he might detonate," she told him one evening, adjusting his arms with brisk, unbothered hands. "He's a baby, not a bomb. He has thrown up on me 4 times, Kang Ji-hwan said. "Twice on this shirt. Babies do that to men who hold their breath the entire time they're holding them." He looked at her sideways. "You're very comfortable insulting me. You're very bad at burping a baby," Kiera said. "Someone has to say it." The fifth spit-up landed directly on the tattoos across his open collar, a spray of curdled formula that made Han Woo-sung turn toward the window so violently that his shoulders shook with silent laughter. Kang Ji-hwan looked down at his ruined collar, then at Kiera, who was already handing him a napkin without any attempt to hide her smile. "Being feared by half the city," she said, "apparently means nothing to a baby with indigestion." "Apparently not," he said, and for the first time since she'd met him, something in his face relaxed enough to almost be a smile. 2 weeks in, he offered her money to become Ha-jun's temporary caregiver, a number so large that she said it back to him twice to make sure she'd heard correctly. "No," she said. "You need it." "I need a lot of things," Kiera said. "That doesn't mean I take money from a stranger to move into his house." "Then don't take the money," Kang Ji-hwan said. "Take the apartment, the medical coverage, the salary that comes with an actual employment contract, taxed, documented, nothing you'd need to explain to anyone. You would live in the guest residence on the estate. You would be close to him. That is all I am offering." She thought about St. Agnes House. She thought about the 11-minute walk she made every night in the cold, standing across a street she wasn't allowed to cross. She thought about waking up every morning not knowing if her son had cried in the night, and whether anyone had come. "Fine," she said. "But I keep my job here too. 2 days a week. I'm not disappearing into your house like I don't exist outside of it." Something shifted behind his eyes, brief and unreadable. "Agreed." She moved into the guest residence the following Monday. It was a modern single-story building at the edge of the estate, gray stone and glass, with a private garden that backed onto Kang Ji-hwan's much larger house. She wore her own clothes there: jeans, soft sweaters, sneakers, a small, deliberate rebellion against a place that made her feel, most days, like she was borrowing someone else's life. She learned quickly that the empire's terrifying reputation covered a domestic incompetence so complete it was almost funny. Kang Ji-hwan owned 6 different strollers, purchased in a single frantic afternoon after Ha-jun's first bad night, and none of them had been assembled correctly. One opened backward. A voice-activated bassinet, imported from Germany, had been set to Portuguese and none of his staff could figure out how to change it back. A diaper disposal machine sealed empty bags with mechanical devotion while leaving the actual dirty diaper sitting untouched on the counter beside it. "You bought all of this," Kiera said, standing in the nursery doorway, "and none of it works." "I bought the best of everything," Kang Ji-hwan said, defensive. "You bought the most expensive of everything. Kiera said. There's a difference. She laughed more in that house than she expected to, and she noticed, with a discomfort she didn't examine too closely, that Kang Jahuan began finding reasons to be in the room when she laughed. Her suspicion of him didn't disappear, but a new suspicion grew alongside it, aimed at herself now instead of him, because somewhere between teaching him to warm a bottle to the right temperature and watching him fall asleep sitting upright in a nursery chair with Ha-jun on his tattooed chest, she had stopped being afraid of him and started, quietly, dangerously, looking forward to seeing him. One Saturday afternoon, Kiera found Kang Ji-hwan sitting on the nursery floor surrounded by 3 different parenting books, all open to different pages. A legal pad beside him covered in handwriting so precise it looked like it belonged on a contract. "What is this?" she asked, crouching down beside him. "A schedule," he said. "Feeding times, nap windows, developmental milestones by month." I cross-referenced 3 sources. Ha-jun doesn't read schedules. Then he'll learn to respect one, Kang Ji-hwan said, and she laughed so hard she had to sit down on the rug beside him. "You run an empire," she said, wiping her eyes. "And you think a 6-month-old is going to negotiate with a legal pad? I've negotiated with worse. Not like this, you haven't." He looked at her sideways, something almost boyish creeping into his expression. "Fine. Teach me your method. Then, since mine amuses you so much." "There is no method," Kiera said. "You watch him. You listen. You stop trying to win. Everything is a method if you write it down enough times." "Not parenting," she said, and took the legal pad gently out of his hands, setting it face down on the carpet between them, the pen rolling off the edge and disappearing under the crib. He didn't reach for the pen. He watched her instead, and something in the quiet stretched a beat too long before either of them looked away. Later that week, Ha-jun discovered his own reflection in the nursery's full-length mirror and refused to sleep unless the mirror faced his crib, a fact that took Kang Ji-hwan 2 full nights and 1 very confused phone call to a pediatric consultant to finally understand. Kiera solved it in under a minute by simply turning the crib around. "You could have called me," she said, not unkindly, watching him rub his eyes at 3 in the morning. "I didn't want to need you for everything," Kang Ji-hwan admitted, quiet enough that she almost missed it. "You do need me for everything," Kiera said. "That's not an insult. That's just what it means to raise a baby with someone." He didn't answer that one at all, but he also didn't argue, and for the rest of the night he sat in the nursery chair a little closer to hers than strictly necessary. He noticed things too. He noticed that she knew the exact 3-note hum that had been written into Ha-jun's orphanage file as Sooth's patient. He noticed that she recognized the blanket the moment she first saw it in his hands, before he'd ever mentioned where it came from. He noticed that she went rigid every single time, whenever anyone in the house mentioned the baby's biological mother. He said nothing about it. Not yet. He found her late one night in the nursery, Ha-jun asleep against her chest, her voice low enough that she clearly believed no one was listening. "I'm sorry I left you," she whispered, pressing her lips to the baby's head. Kang Ji-hwan stood in the doorway for a long moment before she noticed him there. "Left him where?" he asked quietly. Kiera's whole body went cold. "I meant leaving him with the nannies," she said. "Earlier this week. I felt bad about it." Kang Ji-hwan didn't answer. He only looked at her, the way a man looks at a lock he's certain has a key somewhere close by, and walked out without another word. The next morning, Kang Ji-hwan called Han Woo-sung into his study before sunrise. "Find out everything about her," he said. "Where she was born, where she worked, where she gave birth, if she gave birth. I want it by tonight." "Sir," Han Woo-sung said, and left without asking why. Because in 6 years of service he had learned that questions slowed things down and answers came faster without them. Kang Ji-hwan didn't confront Kiera that day. Instead, something unexpected happened. The distance he'd meant to keep between them dissolved a little further, the way distance always does when 2 people share a kitchen at midnight. They began eating together after Ha-jun fell asleep. Plates of reheated food at the enormous marble island in his kitchen, a room so large it had 6 burners and had clearly never once been used by the man who owned it before Kiera arrived. 6 coffee machines, she said, gesturing at the row along the counter with her chopsticks. And you don't know how to make instant coffee. I have people for that. You have people for a jar and hot water? I have people for everything, Kang Ji-hwan said, and there was something almost sheepish in it, an admission he clearly wasn't used to making. She learned, in pieces, why a man who owned 4 hotels and controlled a criminal network still hummed only 3 notes to a crying baby. An old injury, years back, the details of which he never fully explained, had left doctors certain he would never father children. His fiancée at the time had left within the month. His extended family had treated the diagnosis less like a tragedy and more like an opening, circling the empire the way vultures circle something that hasn't quite finished dying. I never expected to want a child, he told her one night, Ha-jun asleep against his bare chest, tattoos rising and falling with each small breath. I went to that orphanage for a charity inspection. 20 minutes, in and out, a photograph for a newsletter. He grabbed my finger and wouldn't let go. I signed the guardianship paperwork before I left the building. That's not a business decision, Kiera said quietly. No, Kang Ji-hwan agreed. It wasn't. She watched him hum those same 3 notes into the dark, and something in her chest ached in a way she recognized but refused to name out loud. The security file arrived on Han Woo-sung's tablet at 11 that night. Kang Ji-hwan read it standing in his study with the lights off, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. Kiera Hayes had given birth at Child Women's Hospital 6 days before she began working at Cheongdam Table. The birth record existed. The surrender record at St. Agnes House existed. But 3 pages were missing from the hospital's file. The pages listing the social worker who processed the case and the exact date the baby left the building. The social worker's name, from what remained, was Kwanera. Kwanera had left her position at Child Women's Hospital 9 days later and could not currently be located. Kang Ji-hwan set the tablet down slowly. He walked to the small locked drawer in his desk where he kept the silver pendant, the one that had been sewn into the corner of Ha-jun's blanket, the one none of his relatives could identify and none of the orphanage staff had ever seen before. He turned it over in his hand under the desk lamp. He recognized the engraving on the back. He'd recognized it the first week and told no one, because recognizing it meant asking a question he wasn't ready to ask. It belonged to his younger half-brother, Yoon Tae-jun. Yoon Tae-jun had vanished 11 months earlier after stealing internal records from the family's shipping operation, records that, according to the family's official account, he had planned to sell to a rival organization before disappearing entirely, a coward and a traitor who had abandoned the empire for money. Kang Ji-hwan had never fully believed that account. Yoon Tae-jun had been reckless, yes, careless with money and charming in a way that made him easy to underestimate. But he had never once, in Kang Ji-hwan's memory, done anything purely for money. He found Kiera in the garden the next afternoon and set the pendant on the table between them without a word. She went pale. "Where did you get that?" she said, though she already knew. "You know exactly where I got it," Kang Ji-hwan said. "Tell me whose it is." Kiera's hands trembled around her cup. His name was. He never told me his real name. He told me he wasn't safe to know. He wore that pendant every day I knew him. He gave it to me the night before he disappeared and told me if anything happened, to make sure it stayed with our son. Our son, Kang Ji-hwan repeated, very quietly, and something in his face changed in a way she had never seen before, somewhere between grief and disbelief, and something that hadn't finished forming yet. "Whose son?" he said. "Say his name." "The man who gave you that pendant. He told me his family called him Tae-jun," Kiera whispered. "I never knew a surname." Kang Ji-hwan closed his eyes. "That's my brother," he said. "That's my younger brother." "Tell me about him," Kiera said. still holding the pendant loosely in her palm. The real him, not the traitor the newspapers wrote about. Kang Ji-hwan sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. He was 7 years younger than me. Our father spoiled him and blamed me for not spoiling him more. He hated the business. He used to disappear for weeks at a time, no explanation, and come back smelling like cheap noodles and cigarette smoke, grinning like he'd gotten away with something. That sounds like the man I hid in a bakery storeroom for 3 days, Kiera said, and her voice cracked on the word storeroom. Tell me about that, Kang Ji-hwan said. I never knew where he went those last months. He showed up bleeding behind the bakery where I worked, she said. Armed men were searching the block. I hid him, cleaned the wound, didn't ask questions because he told me questions would get me killed. For 3 days he stayed in that storeroom, and he was funny and gentle and terrified underneath all of it, though he tried very hard not to show the terrified part. That sounds exactly like him, Kang Ji-hwan said quietly. He was reckless with everything except the people he actually cared about. That part of him he protected. He protected me for 3 days and then vanished for the rest of my life, Kiera said. I don't know how to hold both of those truths at once. Neither do I, Kang Ji-hwan admitted. I've been trying since the day he disappeared. He told me he was running from his family, Kiera said. He never said which parts of it were true and which parts were the story he needed me to believe, so I'd let him stay. Both, probably, Kang Ji-hwan said. He was very good at telling stories that were true enough to survive on. He promised he'd come back. I believe he meant it, Kang Ji-hwan said. I don't think leaving you was ever the plan. Kiera looked down at the pendant again, turning it slowly between her fingers before setting it back on the table. I used to think I imagined the good parts of him, that grief made him kinder in my memory than he really was. No, Kang Ji-hwan said. You didn't imagine it. I just never got to see it directed at anyone but me. The DNA test was ordered that same evening, quietly, through Seo Min-ho, a family physician who had served the Kang household for 11 years and had learned, in that time, exactly which questions he was permitted to ask and which he was not. 3 days later, while they waited for results, a black sedan followed Kiera's car during a supply run into the city, keeping a careful 2-car distance the entire route. When she returned to the estate, one of Ha Jun's medical files, the copy kept in the guest residence for her own records, had been removed from the drawer where she'd left it. She told Kang Ji-hwan that night. He said nothing, but the look on his face made Han Woo-sung double the guards at the gate before midnight. The results came back on a Thursday morning. Ha Jun was not Kang Ji-hwan's biological son. He was his nephew, the child he had adopted out of instinct, out of a grip around one finger he hadn't been able to walk away from, belonged by blood to the brother the family had condemned as a traitor 11 months earlier. Kang Ji-hwan sat with the results for a long time before he told anyone, turning the silver pendant over and over between his fingers, trying to understand how a single afternoon at an orphanage had quietly rearranged the entire architecture of his family. Kiera asked to meet him in the nursery that evening. She wore jeans and a plain cream blouse, and she set Ha Jun's original hospital bracelet on the changing table before either of them said anything. I need to tell you something, she said, before you hear it from someone else. Kang Ji-hwan waited. I am his mother, she said. Not a stranger who happened to be good with babies. Not someone who just recognized a blanket. I gave birth to him at Child Women's Hospital. I surrendered him to St. Agnes House 6 days later because I had nowhere to sleep and a social worker told me he could die on the street if I kept him with me. I walked past that gate every night after my shift because I needed to know he was still breathing. I memorized your license plate the night you took him. I found out who you were. I took this job because it put me close enough to hold him again. The silence that followed lasted long enough that Ha Jun, asleep in his crib, stirred and settled again before either of them spoke. You knew, Kang Ji-hwan said finally. Every day, every conversation. You knew, and you let me believe you were a stranger with good instincts. I was terrified you'd take him from me the moment you knew. So instead, you let me fall in love with both of you while hiding it, Kang Jihuan said, and his voice had gone dangerously flat. The voice Han Wusung had once described to a new recruit as the sound a man makes right before he stops being reasonable. I never wanted your money, Kiera said. I never wanted anything from you except to know my son was safe. You don't get to decide that for me, he said. You don't get to decide what I believed and what I didn't. I gave you a home. I gave you access to my son. I gave you. He stopped, jaw tight, and looked away from her. You should have told me the day I asked why he knew you. Would you have let me stay? I don't know, he said. That's the part that should frighten you most. I don't know what I would have done. And now I'll never know, because you decided that for both of us. In the middle of the argument, Ha-jun woke and began laughing at Kang Ji-hwan's furious hand gestures, delighted by the sharp motion of his uncle's arms slicing the air. The angrier Kang Ji-hwan became, the harder the baby laughed, until even Kiera, standing 3 feet away with her heart breaking, felt her mouth twitch despite everything. The laughter didn't survive what came next. You'll stay in the guest apartment, Kang Ji-hwan said. Not in the main house. Not without supervision. My lawyers will determine what happens from here. Ji-hwan, she said quietly, before he could turn away completely. Ask me the question you actually want to ask. He stopped in the doorway, his back to her. What question? Whether I regret it, Kiera said. Whether, if I could do the whole year again, I would still walk past that gate every night instead of telling you the truth on day one. He turned around slowly. Would you? Yes, she said, and her voice didn't waver. Because I didn't know you yet. I only knew a man with armed guards and a reputation that made grown business owners flinch. You want me to apologize for protecting my son from a stranger I hadn't learned to trust yet. I won't do that. I will apologize for every day after that. Once I did know you, and still said nothing. Something in his jaw unclenched, barely. That's not the same apology I was expecting. It's the honest one, Kiera said. You can be angry at the honest one too, if you want. But at least be angry at the truth instead of a version of me you've decided is simpler to hate. He didn't answer that directly. He only looked at her for a long moment, something raw moving behind his eyes. And then he turned and walked out of the nursery before either of them could say anything that might undo the wall he'd just built between them. She left the nursery without arguing, because arguing required a version of hope she no longer had the strength to hold on to. The separation was worse than either of them expected. Ha-jun refused to settle at night without her nearby, and Kang Ji-hwan spent 3 days walking the halls at 2 in the morning with mismatched socks and a pacifier clipped to the collar of a black designer shirt, too exhausted to notice or care. Kiera's milk supply dropped from the stress, a betrayal her own body delivered on top of everything else, and she sat alone in the guest apartment feeling, for the second time in her life, like she was failing her son simply by needing rest. Han Wusung's investigation, running in parallel with the family's cold fury, uncovered something far larger than either of them expected. Kiera's eviction, 11 months earlier, had not been random. Her landlord had been paid to remove her. Her job applications afterward had been quietly blocked, one after another, by an anonymous caller warning employers she was unreliable. The hospital social worker, Kwan Era, had been paid 2 million won to convince a homeless new mother that surrendering her child was the only responsible choice. The man behind all of it was Kang Ji-hwan's uncle, Yoon Kyung-soo. Yoon Kyung-soo had learned, through a contact inside the hospital records office, that Yoon Tae-jun had fathered a child before disappearing. Under an old family trust drafted 3 generations earlier, that child stood to inherit a significant share of the empire the moment his parentage was proven, a share that would come directly out of the portion Yoon Kyung-soo had spent a decade maneuvering to claim for himself. Yoon Kyung-soo had wanted the baby lost in the system, untraceable, before anyone connected him to the Kang bloodline. He had never anticipated that his own nephew, Kang Ji-hwan, would walk into an orphanage on a routine charity visit and adopt the one child who could undo everything he'd built. Kang Ji-hwan read the report standing at his study window, hands flat on the desk, breathing slow and controlled in the way Han Woo-sung recognized as the last calm before something violent. "She wasn't hunting my money," he said quietly. "No, sir," Han Woo-sung said. "Someone was hunting her." Before Kang Ji-hwan could act on any of it, before he could even find the right words to say to Kiera, her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "Your son's father is alive. Come alone if you want the truth." An address followed. A warehouse district near the port, 30 minutes from the estate. She went without telling anyone. It was, of course, a trap. The address led to an abandoned commercial kitchen owned, on paper, by a shell company 3 layers removed from anything bearing the Kong name. Young Kyung-soo was waiting for her inside, seated at a stainless steel prep table, perfectly calm. He had clearly planned every second of the conversation in advance. Yoon Tae-jun didn't run away from this family, he told her, watching her face carefully. "He found records that would have ended my career and quite possibly my freedom. I made sure he never got the chance to use them." "You killed him," Kiera said, and her voice didn't shake the way she expected it to. "I removed a problem," Yoon Kyung-soo said. "The same way I intend to remove this one. You'll sign documents surrendering all parental claims to the child. In exchange, you'll be allowed to leave this building breathing. Refuse, and I'll simply explain to the family that you attempted to extort them, and that the situation required a permanent solution." Kiera looked around the kitchen while he spoke, cataloging exits, distances, weight, weakness, the way she had learned to catalog a dining room during a 10-hour shift on her feet. 2 guards stood by the door. A third stood near the loading dock. Industrial shelving lined one wall, heavy with steel bowls and stacked trays. She had spent 4 years of her life working restaurant floors. She understood commercial kitchens better than these men understood anything at all. While Yoon Kyung-soo talked, she quietly loosened the wheel lock on a heavy storage rack beside her chair. When he stood to hand her the surrender documents, she shoved the rack into the nearest guard's path, sending it crashing across the tile in an explosion of steel bowls that sent both remaining men diving for cover. She ran for the loading dock, slipping deliberately through a puddle of cooking oil she'd noticed the moment she walked in, timing it so the guard chasing her hit the same slick patch and slid, arms wheeling, directly into a tower of stacked mixing bowls. "Stop her!" Yoon Kyung-soo shouted from somewhere behind the wreckage of steel bowls, his composure finally cracking. "She is worth nothing to me dead, but she is worth even less to me free." Kiera's lungs burned. Her sneakers slid twice on the wet tile before she caught her balance against a steel counter and kept moving. She didn't make it to the exit. A 4th man she hadn't accounted for caught her by the loading dock door and dragged her back inside. One arm locked hard across her collarbone. "Let go of me," she said, twisting against his grip. And for one furious second, she thought of Ha-jun's small fist closing around her finger, of every night she'd stood outside a gate she wasn't allowed to enter, of every single thing she had already survived to reach this exact moment. "I did not survive homelessness and a hospital that wanted to give my son away just to die in somebody's walk-in freezer." The guard didn't answer. He simply pulled her back toward the center of the kitchen, toward Yoon Kyung-soo, who straightened his ruined jacket and smiled like a man reclaiming control of a room that had already slipped out of his hands. Kang Ji-hwan arrived 4 minutes later with Han Woo-sung and 8 men behind him, moving through the building with a discipline built over years of exactly this sort of night. He found Yoon Kyung-soo first, standing over Kiera with a gun loosely at his side, and stopped in the doorway with his hands open and visible, forcing every instinct in his body to stay still. "You'll kill me either way," Yoon Kyung-soo said. "So consider carefully how loud you want this to be." "I'm not going to kill you," Kang Ji-hwan said. "I'm going to do something you'll hate far more." Kiera, still on the floor near the prep table, reached up without either man noticing and pulled the fire alarm mounted on the wall behind her. The suppression system activated seconds later, dumping foam and water across the entire kitchen, ruining Young Kyung-soo's suit, knocking one guard's wig sideways in a way so absurd that Kiera, soaked and terrified, and finally safe, laughed despite everything. A short, disbelieving bark of a laugh that made Kang Ji-hwan look at her like she'd lost her mind. In the chaos, Han Woo-sung's men secured Young Kyung-soo and the surviving guards without a single shot fired. Instead of ordering the death everyone in the room expected, Kang Ji-hwan made a different decision. He turned over the falsified medical records, the eviction bribes, the payment history to Kwon-era, and the recovered evidence of Yoon Tae-jun's murder to the Metropolitan Police, along with a legal team that made certain none of it could quietly disappear. "This family has taken enough from that child already," he told his uncle, standing over him in the ruined kitchen, soaked through, calm in a way that frightened Young Kyung-soo more than any threat could have. "It stops with you." Young Kyung-soo was arrested within the hour. Kwon-era was located 2 days later, and the temporary guardianship process at St. Agnes House was formally reopened for review. Kang Ji-hwan found Kiera sitting on the loading dock afterward, wrapped in a blanket someone had produced from one of the vehicles. "I sent you away because I was angry," he said. "But that isn't the whole truth. I sent you away because I was afraid. Betrayal frightens me more than any gun in that building tonight." "I understand why you were afraid," Kiera said. "But you don't get to protect someone by controlling them. I've had enough of my life controlled by other people's decisions." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm asking to do better." She let him kiss her then. They're on the loading dock, soaked and exhausted and finally honest with each other. Ha-jun, who had been asleep in Han Woo-sung's arms nearby, chose that exact moment to wake and hurl a plastic teething toy directly at Kang Ji-hwan's forehead with surprising accuracy for a child his age. Kiera laughed so hard she had to sit back down. "No court," Kang Ji-hwan said, rubbing his forehead. "No family, no criminal organization is ever going to separate you from that boy again. I promise you that." The court restored Kiera's full parental rights within a month. Rather than fighting for custody, Kang Ji-hwan asked only to remain part of Ha-jun's life in whatever way the law and Kiera would allow. They built something unusual together. Kiera kept her own apartment on the estate, but spent most evenings in the main house. They sat through parenting classes side by side, both of them pretending, badly, to be an ordinary couple learning ordinary things. During one class, Kang Ji-hwan spent 15 silent, increasingly furious minutes trying to fold a portable stroller while the instructor demonstrated an entirely different model at the front of the room. Kiera reached over, pressed a single button, and the stroller collapsed instantly. "Don't tell anyone about this," he said, straightening his jacket as if that might restore some dignity to the last quarter hour. "Too late," said Han Woo-sung from the back row, holding up his phone, already mid-upload to a group chat neither of them had ever been told existed. "Delete that," Kang Ji-hwan said. "Already sent, sir." Kiera built her own future in the meantime. Using 4 years of restaurant experience and a mind sharpened by necessity, she developed a business plan for a chain of family-friendly restaurants, flexible scheduling for employees who were also mothers, emergency housing partnerships for women leaving hospitals with nowhere to go, private nursing rooms in every location. Kang Ji-hwan offered to fund the entire project outright. Kiera refused the gift and insisted on a formal business loan instead, with real terms, real interest, real paperwork. "You're harsher than my own bankers," he complained. "Good," Kiera said. "Then you'll respect the terms." She brought him the full business plan on a Tuesday night, spreading printed pages across the kitchen island while Ha-jun napped upstairs. 9 locations in 5 years, she said, tapping the projection sheet. "Every one profitable on its own before we open the next. You could open faster." Kang Ji-hwan said, scanning the numbers. I could have the capital moved by Friday. I know you could, Kiera said. That's why I'm telling you no. You haven't even heard my terms. I don't need your terms. I need a loan, Ji-hwan, with an interest rate, on a schedule, like a bank would give any other business owner in this city. I'm not a bank. Then be one for 10 minutes, she said, sliding the loan agreement across the counter. Sign where it says borrower acknowledges standard commercial terms. He read the document twice, slower than necessary, clearly stalling. This interest rate is higher than what I'd have offered for free. That's the point, Kiera said. I want to owe you money, not owe you a favor. Money I can pay back on my own terms. Favors have a way of following people around for the rest of their lives. He signed it, finally, scowling the whole time, clearly still convinced he'd been right and lost anyway. Kiera framed a photocopy of the signature page a year later and hung it in the hallway of her very first restaurant, right where customers could see it on their way to the register. Their romance deepened through the ordinary friction of shared mornings and shared exhaustion, until one difference emerged that no amount of affection could dissolve. Kiera wanted more children. Kang Ji-hwan underwent additional testing with Seo Min-ho, hoping, quietly, that some part of the earlier diagnosis had been wrong the way so much else had turned out to be wrong. The results confirmed what the original injury had done. The damage was permanent. He would never father a biological child. We could adopt, he told her. I respect adoption more than almost anyone you know, Kiera said gently. But I also want to carry a child again, under better circumstances than the ones I had with Ha-jun. I want a bigger family, Ji-hwan. I don't want to spend the rest of my life pretending that wanting it will go away. He considered, for one long night, asking her to marry him anyway and hoping the wish would fade. He knew, even as he considered it, that hope built on someone else's quiet sacrifice eventually curdled into resentment, and resentment, left long enough, could hurt a child who deserved none of it. So he made, instead, the most loving decision of his life. I won't ask you to give up the family you want, he told her, just because we love each other. I'd rather lose the chance to marry you than watch you resent me for it in 10 years. They agreed, without bitterness, that they would not marry. They would remain co-parents, business partners, and, however unconventional it sounded out loud, the closest kind of friends two people could become after surviving what they'd survived together. Their last night, as anything resembling a couple, was quiet. They ate takeout on the kitchen floor after Ha-jun spilled juice across the dining table and refused to eat anywhere else, and they talked honestly, without performance, about what they had given each other. You taught me that a family could be gentle, Kiera said. You gave me the chance to become the kind of man worth being gentle to, Kang Ji-hwan said. They shared one last kiss, not as a promise of forever, but as gratitude for a love that had already changed both of their lives permanently. 6 years passed. Kiera now owned 9 locations of what had become, in the soul food scene, a genuinely beloved chain of family restaurants, each one with a private nursing room, a meal program for mothers in crisis, and a standing partnership with 3 shelters across the city. Kang Ji-hwan had converted nearly all of his family's holdings into fully legitimate businesses, a slow and deliberate unwinding that had taken years and cost him more allies than he cared to count. He still wore tailored black shirts with the top buttons open, tattoos visible along his neck, but these days he spent far more time discussing school pickup schedules than shipping routes. Ha-jun, now 6 years old, moved happily between 2 homes. At his mother's apartment, he had ordinary toys, ordinary chores, and a mother who made him clean his own plate. At his uncle's estate, he had a miniature electric car, a security detail who let him win imaginary sword fights, and a bodyguard who kept emergency cookies in his jacket pocket at all times. You are spoiling him, Kiera told Kang Ji-hwan for what felt like the 100th time, watching the boy race his electric car across the driveway with 2 guards jogging behind him. He requires appropriate resources, Kang Ji-hwan said. He is 6, Kiera said. He does not require a custom suit, a remote-controlled sports car, and a bodyguard who carries snacks. Their co-parenting had settled, over the years, into something warm and reliably funny. They attended every school event together. They never once asked their son to choose between them. Kiera had, in recent months, begun seeing a kind pediatric architect named Moon Junho, a man who designed children's hospitals for a living and made no secret of wanting a large family of his own one day. Kang Ji-hwan pretended to be entirely supportive of the relationship, while privately ordering an investigation into Moon Junho thorough enough to embarrass a national intelligence agency. I only wanted to confirm he pays his taxes, Kang Ji-hwan said, when Kiera discovered the file and threatened, with real conviction, to ban him from every restaurant she owned. And that he knows how to install a car seat, she said flatly. That too. You had someone follow him to his own mother's birthday dinner, Ji-hwan. I had someone confirm his mother exists and is who she says she is, Kang Ji-hwan said. That's due diligence. That's an obsession wearing a suit, Kiera said. He is a pediatric architect. He designs hospital wings for sick children. He is, without question, the least dangerous man either of us has ever met. Which is precisely why I don't trust it, Kang Ji-hwan muttered, and Kiera laughed so hard she had to set her coffee down before she spilled it. Ha-jun likes him, she said, once she'd recovered. That should count for something, coming from you. Ha-jun likes anyone who lets him stay up past bedtime, Kang Ji-hwan said. That is not a character reference. It's the only character reference that ever mattered to you. Kiera reminded him gently, and watched something in his face soften despite his best effort to keep it stern. Fine, he admitted. The investigation came back clean. Genuinely clean. Almost disappointingly clean. You wanted him to fail. I wanted a reason, Kang Ji-hwan said, quieter now. I didn't find one. I'm working on being glad about that. There had been no wedding, and there likely never would be, not between the two of them. Kiera had told him plainly, months earlier, that when the time felt right, she might marry Moon Junho and have the larger family she'd always wanted. Kang Ji-hwan had admitted, just as plainly, that hearing it hurt more than he expected, and that he intended to keep the promise he'd made anyway, the one about never turning love into a cage. Any children you have, he told her, will be Ha-jun's brothers and sisters. That makes the mind to spoil too. The morning of the anniversary, Kiera stood in the restaurant's kitchen going over the evening's schedule with her staff, and Ha-jun sat on a stool by the pass, swinging his legs and eating crackers he'd stolen from the pantry without asking. Are you nervous? He asked her, with the blunt curiosity only a 6-year-old could manage. A little, Kiera admitted. This place matters to me more than almost anywhere else in the world. Because it's where you got me back, Ha-jun said. Not as a question, just a fact he'd apparently worked out on his own somewhere between kindergarten and now. Kiera set down her clipboard. Who told you that? Uncle Woo-sung, Ha-jun said. He shows me the videos sometimes. The one where you take me away from Dad in the middle of dinner. That video is supposed to be private, Kiera said, making a mental note to have a conversation with Han Woo-sung later that would not be gentle. I like it, Ha-jun said simply. You look really brave. And Dad looks really confused. Your dad was always confused back then, Kiera said, smiling despite herself. Some things never change. He's better now, Ha-jun said loyally. He knows how to fold the stroller now? Sometimes. Sometimes, Kiera agreed, and kissed the top of his head before sending him off to find Kang Ji-hwan, who had arrived early and was currently arguing with a florist about the correct shade of white for the centerpieces, a level of attention to detail that had never once, in 6 years, surprised her. The turning point of the evening came during the 6th anniversary celebration of Kiera's very first restaurant, the same dining room where a Mafia boss had once stood frozen over a corner booth. Ha-jun climbed onto the small stage set up for the occasion and grabbed the microphone before anyone could stop him. "My mom fed me in this restaurant," he announced, "because my dad didn't know what he was doing." The room erupted into laughter. "I was handling a complicated infant negotiation," Kang Ji-hwan said, straight-faced, from his seat near the front. "He still can't fold a stroller," Ha Jun added, delighted by the growing laughter, and Han Woo-sung, now gray at the temples, still fiercely loyal, pulled out his phone and played the 6-year-old video for the entire room on the projection screen behind the stage. Even Kang Ji-hwan laughed at that one. Later, the two of them stood near the restaurant's front window, watching Ha-jun chase Han Woo-sung's grandchildren across the patio in the last of the evening light. "We didn't end up the way either of us expected," Kang Ji-hwan said. "No," Kiera agreed. "We didn't become husband and wife. We became something else," he said. "Something that survived betrayal and stayed anyway. Two people who chose not to use our son as a weapon," Kiera said. "That's rarer than a marriage, if you ask me." "Thank you," Kang Ji-hwan said quietly, "for grabbing him out of my arms that first night. For not letting me keep failing at it alone." Kiera smiled and glanced toward the window, where Ha-jun had just tripped over his own excitement and been scooped up laughing by one of the guards. "Someone had to save that boy from your terrible bottle-holding technique," she said. Outside, their son ran between the two homes he'd always known, one hand eventually finding hers, the other finding Kang Ji-hwan's, as the three of them walked out of the restaurant together into the warm dark. They were not a married couple. They were not strangers. They were not enemies. And they never became the family that either of them had once imagined the night a crying baby brought them together in a crowded dining room. They became something sturdier than that. Two people who had survived betrayal, corruption, a kidnapping, and every reason in the world to walk away from each other, and who chose instead, every single day, on purpose, to stay present in one small boy's life together. A family built, in the end, out of nothing more complicated than honesty, sacrifice, and love that refused to disappear just because it changed shape.